Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Essen, and this is TV7's Editor's Note. I'd like to start, of course, by highlighting that our regular broadcast schedule on TV7, as well as on our affiliate channels, the majority of them, is not the same. Nevertheless, we still air on TCT, NRB TV, on many of the channels in the United States, Australia, in New Zealand, Fiji, and elsewhere. So we welcome all of our viewers, and on social media, of course. And if you're watching via social media, like, share, to help us, of course, reach as many as possible people around the world. Now, today's update is going to focus on the complexities related to the anticipated meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, scheduled for later this month on the 29th, right after Christmas, where the Israeli leader is going to visit President Trump at his residence in Mar-a-Lago. What is going to happen there is a very good question. What are the implications of this meeting at a time of great complexities in the Middle East, carrying a weight of many threats and dangers? To discuss all that, let's introduce first our guest for today, my dear friend, colleague, longtime friend, Dr. Lerman, retired colonel from the IDF Intelligence Directorate, Deputy Director of the Israeli National Security Council, Deputy National Security Advisor, 3 points, Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and many more positions over the years. Great to have you with us, Iran.
Always a pleasure.
Let's start with the meeting. It's a crucial juncture.
Yes.
With significant implications. The deputy assistant to President Trump, who I like to quote quite often because he is really a brilliant individual, Dr. Sebastian Gorka,
right.
They're a senior director for counterterrorism, always says when we're talking about the Middle East for the Trump administration today, the threat reference is Iran, 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 Iran.
Definitely, because I think the lesson of the North Korean experiment, trying to lock the stable after the horse is bolted, taught the Trump administration that the Iranians must be stopped before they have the bomb. That's as simple as that. And we are coming to a T-junction in the road, because the Iranian regime is facing very, very serious trouble. The snapback, the American pressure, the collapse of the Iranian currency.
The economy is in shambles.
The economy is falling apart. There's no water in the faucets. I mean, it's no longer a question of chicken on the table as it used to be. And they will have to make a catastrophic choice for them. Either bow down to pressure and negotiate for real to terminate their military nuclear project, or take the other road, which could lead to another confrontation. And for Israel, there's the added dimension of the ballistic missile threat.
Let me ask you this, because before we move to the two threats on the table that you referred to, the nuclear and the ballistic missiles, both of which are a challenge, for the Ayatollah regime, a fundamentalist, zealot regime of 12er Shia Islam, which is one that demands defiance to Western civilization and the eradication of the State of Israel for the Mahdi to return.
Right. Essentially,
to bow down,
to be in the business of destroying Israel is for the Iranian revolution the ultimate proof that the Shia have a superior position in Islam as against all these Sunni traitors who buy weapons from Israel and so on and so forth.
But on that specifically, I mean, to bow down to the West, as you mentioned, would be to disown their own beliefs, wouldn't it?
For Khamenei, certainly. And I think he's not about to bend. There are people all around him who understand that the situation has become critical. I think I believe President Pezeshkian when he wails out loud that things have to change, that you have to evacuate Tehran and build a new, that things have come to a point of possibly no return.
Of strategic implication. I mean, the Russians, during Peter I, they altered the head, or rather the capital city from St. Petersburg to Moscow.
Oh, the other way around.
The other way around,
yeah.
right? For strategic reasons, though.
And look at Egypt now, but these are indications of extreme concern for the future. But I'm not. If you ask me for my guess, Khamenei will not bend, and 2026 will be a year of another confrontation.
So let's talk about the two threat references. One, nuclear weapon capabilities, the ultimate weapon, the weapon that, to our deep regret, has devastating consequences to civilization. And on the other hand, has also deterred an actual war from taking place between great powers for the last couple of decades.
Yes, but that is MAD or its derivatives, mutually assured destruction, works at the end of the day when both sides are ultimately rational players. You look at the nearest we ever got was Kennedy and Khrushchev, and you see how Khrushchev's mind worked at the time. At the end of the day, he was a rational player.
Right.
And so, of course, was Kennedy, who was very much, was reading Barbara Tuchman on World War I and saying to himself, I'm not going to be drawn into something that gets out of control.
They're interest-driven, and their interpretations of what their national security interests are for the other party to decipher.
And with the Iranian regime, there's always this question. I sat enough times with Prime Minister Netanyahu briefing others, saying he was looking for a translation of the Hebrew expression "srutim." There's scratch in there. There's something wrong with the way Khamenei's mind works on these issues. So it's not a tolerable proposition for them to have the bomb and be contained by some kind of rational give and take. Moreover, unlike the North Korean case, which did not drive a cascade of military nuclearization in Japan and even South Korea, or Taiwan, or further afield, or Australia, or further afield, in the case of Iran, we can be almost certain that if they crossed effectively that threshold, that means Saudi Arabia, that means Turkey, that means possibly Egypt with their new Russian-built infrastructure, and so on, the entire NPT dam will go down.
Which is the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which basically aims to limit the global infrastructure of nations from racing towards nuclear proliferation.
Now, and they did the job for many years. There were 5, maybe 6, 7, the Pakistanis and the Indians, 7 and 8. North Korea crossed the threshold, but that's about it. I mean, there's a certain country about which there are all kinds of rumors, but basically it stayed contained.
Right.
And if it breaks, the consequences for the region and the world are going to be very, very severe. So this is a key, absolutely the key issue.
There is, as you mentioned, the statements made by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan back in 2019.
Why just 5?
Right. Why just 5? Why are we not allowed to break out to nuclear weapon capabilities? And many of those aspects where he rejected basically the notion that Turkey may not do so. There were many discussions over the years about the Turkish angle, but during Operation Rising Lion, namely the 12-day war between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the cherry on top, Operation Midnight Hammer, where we had the B-2 American bombers coming and degrading Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz in a fashion that was, or rather, Fordo and Natanz, with Isfahan being degraded by Tomahawk missiles, but we won't go into the fine prints. Seeing the manner in which Israel conducted the first 11 days, or rather the first 9 days and the subsequent 2 days, Um, it focused on Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, launchers, ballistic missiles,
and
strategic infrastructure, capabilities to manufacture, many aspects that are related
because
to
they
that.
were trying, of course, to draw blood in Israel.
Right. Right.
They did some serious damage to the Weizmann Institute, the Soroka Hospital, but at the end of the day,
Civilian infrastructure.
civilian infrastructure, absolutely civilian and beneficial to the world, I would say, which they managed to destroy. But at the end of the day, the level of loss of life in Israeli society was much lower than they expected because of the effectiveness of the campaign. But Israel was also going after the nuclear infrastructure, including the nuclear scientists and so on, and laying the ground for American action by demonstrating that Iran is wide open to effective attack. And it remains wide open. But if Iran is now working to restore its ballistic missile capabilities, that's a threat to the lives of Israelis that the Israeli government is not necessarily going to tolerate for much longer.
So this is going to be another significant discussion point. As a long-term consideration of those challenges, we also need to take into account the statements. During Operation Rising Lion, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say that the ballistic missile program and the aspirations to reach oversaturation, the capacity to oversaturate the surface-to-air capabilities of the State of Israel, the air defenses, the Iron Dome, in this case, ballistic missiles is, of course, the Arrow systems, but we're talking here about a true threat to the State of Israel. And that is something that Turkish President Erdogan suddenly announced while Netanyahu was making those remarks. We're going to pursue oversaturation capabilities, signing an agreement with Somalia and establishing a robust ballistic missile collaboration of sorts, establishing another agreement and starting the manufacturing, of course, of a space program in Somalia and other aspects that are also related, of course, to this. What are the threats of more countries pursuing such an endeavor when you hear so much rhetoric against Israel?
Well, whether Turkey will become an active enemy with all the consequences
Still a rival.
is still an open question.
Right.
We back in my days as the director of military intelligence, we used to distinguish between threat and risk.
Right.
Turkey is still at the risk column. It is not an active threat. There are two or three profound reasons. One of them, membership of NATO. The other is ultimately still a...
Is NATO a restraining factor?
Up to a point, yes, because Turkey would not like to be left alone in its given its northern neighborhood and so on. The relationship is and the vulnerability of the Turkish economy, which is, the whole AKP success story is because they've been able to elevate millions of Turks from the Gecekondu to high rises in lower middle class, from lumpen proletariat to lower middle class, if you wish.
Just for the sake of our viewers, the AKP faction is the Islamist faction led by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It rose to power back in 2001, merely 2 or 3 years after President Erdogan himself was incarcerated for his Islamist tendencies. Since then, Turkey has taken, of course, a turn and has become more and more Islamist in nature, at least within the leadership. And the last hammer to the coffin was in 2017, when Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan managed to convince his parliament to gain executive powers that have granted him a presidency of
effectively for life.
well, not for life.
Well, he gets elected again. And
the
again.
next election is his final term.
We shall see.
And unless
Constitutions tend to be a bit flexible.
Correct, but the interesting part, he needs the Kurds.
Yes, he does.
for the purpose of
The
amending the
HDP, yes.
constitution, and that is tricky.
Tricky, but the basic thing is that all of this has been built on the rise of the Turkish economy.
Right.
And if it takes steps that would undermine it, that would actually end up closing doors for Turkish exports and businesses, that actually could have an immense political price.
So this is the question.
So these are
Risk
it's a cat.
or threat?
It's a cat. It's a fierce cat, but it has a tail that can be pulled, so to speak.
Interesting analogy. Well, let's take this one step further, because President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also highlighted that Israel needs to be contained, and that relations with Egypt are deepening, and that they see eye to eye on this necessity. What are we to make out of that?
Well, it's an interesting story, because just 10 years ago, they were at each other's throats. Egypt was the one country that prevented the Security Council from denouncing the attempted coup against Erdogan in Turkey. Erdogan was calling Sisi a usurper of the presidency, and it was on the verge of a total breakdown. Since then, the Turks have Erdogan's come to the conclusion that he needs to court what I call the camp of stability in the region. And even Israel, before the outbreak of the war, even Israel was the target of one of these gestures when President Herzog was invited in full honors. And he was courting the Saudis and the Egyptians. He's trying to rebuild a relationship that was almost at the verge of ruin.
Very pragmatic.
Is very manipulative and effectively manipulative. Having said all this, I don't think anyone anywhere near Sisi has forgotten that this is essentially a sister party or a cousin party to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is his mortal enemy and which he took away from power in a fairly brutal fashion. And he must be very wary of the idea of growing Turkish influence.
I mean, he technically incarcerated close to 100,000 people
and
of the Muslim Brotherhood.
There was Rabbi al-Adawi. You know, when Erdogan has been seen making this four-finger sign, the Rabba, which in reference to the slaughter of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Rabba al-Adawiya Square. The Rabba means it's the name of a saint from early Islam, a woman buried here in Jerusalem, by the way. But it also means four. And he symbolized his identification with the repressed brotherhood in Egypt. So Sisi, I believe, at the end of the day, shares the concern of others in the region, Israel included, about having the Turks in Gaza, for example, on his border, and their rising power.
And they've been proactive on this matter. So let's touch on Gaza, because we don't have very much time left. The four guarantors, so to speak, of Gaza ceasefire and President Trump's 20-point plan
and UN Security Council Resolution 2803
include the United States itself alongside Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt.
Yes.
Now, this is a very interesting mix.
Only one of the four has not exactly a veto power, but there's an obligation for whoever builds the ISF, which is the Americans, to consult with Egypt and with Israel.
Because it has a border with Gaza.
Yes.
It has access to Gaza.
It cannot be implemented without Israeli and Egyptian consent. Really amazing things have been happening. I mean, we need to think of the idea that there is an American operation on Israeli soil with officers from Arab countries actively participating in all of this under the aegis of CENTCOM. And I hope CENTCOM survives. I don't know what Hegseth has in mind. Right. We shall see. But all of this is in order to build the foundations for the next phase in Gaza. Interestingly, the Turks were not invited to the contributing nations conference in Doha.
Not only because of Israel.
Not only probably because of Israel, but also because, well, the Qataris would have loved to have them invited.
Right.
But CENTCOM had a different perspective.
Exactly.
They basically, what they are here for is to protect Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, and nowadays also Israel is a key part of the CENTCOM array of allies. And so we have an interesting turn in the road. Now, there is a strong pro-Turkish influence in the Trump White House.
Not in the CENTCOM command, though.
But not in CENTCOM.
Right.
I said Turkey is EUCOM.
Right.
And so there are, let's say, winds blowing from various directions that are going to affect the way this issue is handled in Mar-a-Lago. Israel will probably be willing to tolerate the current situation for some time to come, because our first priority is Iran, and then there's Hezbollah and the need to perhaps reduce them further so the Lebanese government will finally feel strong enough to take action. And the uncertainties of Syria. So, and in Gaza,
this goes, of course, to
in Gaza,
the
Hamas is contained.
Right.
But we are not going to tolerate forever their survival in power in Gaza. So either with one major onslaught, or the other way, salami slices taken again and again and again from their controlled areas, we are going to have, it looks as if Israel is the one who will have to create the conditions for the ISF to bring stabilization to Gaza.
This is going to be vigorously discussed, of course, in the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump.
Yes, this is going to be
at a time when we do hear Jordan's King Abdullah II, alongside also people in the circles of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, but rather the Jordanians speaking on behalf of the Egyptians in many cases, which I find very odd, stating that they would not like to see the ISF being a peace enforcement force, but rather a peacekeeping force, which would allow Hamas, a designated terrorist organization in Israel, United States, and Europe, to remain in power. Something that Israel cannot accept, of course.
The language of, I have to say, the language of 2803, and that's the UN Security Council resolution, which even the Algerians voted for, is clearly about decommissioning all weapons of terrorist groups. It doesn't even necessarily mention Hamas by name, but Gaza should be demilitarized very clearly. So if the ISF will not do it, Israel will do it sooner or later.
Which would
and
reignite
it will reignite. My guess is that with all access to Gaza blocked, with Hamas increasingly weakened, it's not going to be as much of a military effort as it was, say, in the first few months of the war.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have roughly 4 minutes to today's edition, and I'd like still to touch on Lebanon.
Yes.
Because Lebanon is a complexity that needs to be dealt with.
Always has been.
Always has been.
It's not a state, it's a state of mind.
Interesting.
Hezbollah, here's a paradox. Hezbollah is as weak as it has ever been in well more than in nearly 40 years of existence. Its leadership has been decimated. Its chief of staff has just been Tabatabai. It's just been taken out. By the way, the name speaks an Iranian origin. Has been taken out by Israeli military action, and they don't react. They are, frankly, this is always a tricky term, deterrence, but they are deterred. At the same time, the Lebanese...
Well, they're preserving oneself, I think, is a better word for it, because deterrence is to a certain point. Self-preservation at this point is more of a survival mechanism.
There are various survival mechanisms. For years, Hezbollah's survival mechanism was that if a single shot is fired at them from Israel, they will retaliate. No longer. They've learned something the hard way.
So let me ask you
this. But the
this.
government still doesn't have it in them to, let's say, translate the very, very positive language they are using. Hezbollah is useless. They have not brought Lebanon anything. They cannot defend the country. They're only bringing it to ruin. The language is fantastic. Action, for the time being, is something else.
Which means that they are preserving oneself against Israel, because if Israel engages with Hezbollah once more, it would diminish its power to a degree where domestic forces could wipe it
actually
out.
Finally
Yes. Geneva Convention.
settle the accounts with these people.
Right, without
For all they've done.
without
The
the
Sunnis in
international
Syria
communities,
and to the Lebanese.
without the international community overly eager to
intervene.
thwart
Right.
such an endeavor. But on the second leg to this, and we have just 1 minute for this, they still do have some 15,000 forces capable of engaging on domestic affairs.
Yes.
What are the prospects of civil war breaking out, considering the fact that Hezbollah would likely, considering the LAF is roughly 60% Shia, win such an endeavor?
Well, if Israel degrades their capabilities even further, then their ability to overtake the state is not going to be what it was in May 2008 when they very successfully challenged the LAF. Things could change. And within the Shia community, you can, if you listen closely, you hear the cracks forming. What good did Hezbollah do for us?
More so, what good did Iran do for us is
In
what they're
recent years.
asking, since
Yes,
the Iranians...
and the Iranian are broke,
Yeah.
and even the money trail is dying out.
And they're seeing also what's happening to the Alawite community in Syria, which
True
is
Iran.
Iran's...
We should find a way to reassure the Shias of Lebanon that if they turn their back on Hezbollah, there will be a way to protect them from the vengeance of the Syrians and the Sunnis and so on, without Hezbollah being their protector.
Colonel, Dr. Lerman, thanks so very much for all of your insights.
You're welcome.
And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well, and to point out we are on our Christmas broadcast schedule. So with that, I'd like also to take the opportunity to wish you a Merry Christmas and to highlight that we are a donation-based organization. And if you are blessed by our endeavors, of course, it would help us a lot if you would support us with a donation, particularly before year's end. We are a 501c3 in the United States, so that is a good point to highlight. You can donate via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. With that, once again, Merry Christmas and Shalom from Jerusalem.